I am terrible at finding introductions to these Q&As, and I can never do it right. I always end up saying, the boring, hello there ladies and gentlemen, this is Q&A with Fred, volume 30. But that's just boring, and I don't know what to say after that. Am I supposed to apologize for not making a Q&A in a while, or am I supposed to talk about how my day has been? And in the end, I just get confused. So this is going to be the introduction. And I think that's good, because one of the things that attracts people to these sort of videos, which is sort of like a vlog without the visual input of my face, the thing that attracts people to vlogs is the fact that they are honest, and that the person recording the vlog is openly spilling out all of their emotions. And I think therefore I should introduce these Q&As by saying that I don't know how to introduce these Q&As. I am lost and I'm confused, and hopefully that will cause other people who also feel confused to like me more. So that's what I was going to say there, and now I have some questions that I'm going to answer, and it's been a while since last time, of course, which I'm sorry for. It's been a little bit iffy for me recently. I have been a little bit occupied with other stuff, but the Q&As are going to return. I said that last time, but I do really mean it this time. And I might get a new podcast out again. I'm going to talk with Kieran, but I think he's available now, so that's good. So it's almost summer. It's late May, and it's very bright outside. It's getting very hot in the days, and people are warm and outgoing, and I hate it. I hate summer. I haven't really had any problems with pollen yet, but there's something about summer that just doesn't fit me. I prefer when things are a bit darker, a bit grayer and rainier. Luckily, right now, the weather in Sweden is quite rainy and quite grey, so I am feeling quite good. I have dressed up in a sort of jacket, a fine jacket. The jacket I used when I graduated, actually. So it has a little bit of sort of gloss on it. It's a little bit shiny. It's like a shiny jacket, and I look very elegant, of course. I'm still wearing jeans, and I have a flannel shirt underneath. So it's not that exclusive. But I thought that I should dress up for this Q&A in hopes that people feel how nice I'm dressed. But I'm not sure if microphones work that way. In any way, it means that I do have some questions for you, and I'm going to try and make this a little bit longer. So here we go. This is the first question. How many stars are there in the sky? From Anonymous. All of these questions will be from Anonymous, so I'm not even going to bother with saying where they're from. I mean, it's pointless. But the number of stars in the sky, it's more than I can count, which is saying a lot, because I can count a very huge number. I mean, it's not really that difficult to count huge numbers, because all you need to know is that, 1 becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, 100 becomes 1,000, and so on. And that, using that, I can sort of count up towards, billions of numbers. But I suppose the one issue is that it would take me quite some time, and I wouldn't be able to count to 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 just sort of in a few minutes. It would probably take me some time, and I'm overall quite kind of a slow person, so I think that I am slower than average at counting. So I don't think you should worry about counting the number of stars in the sky, because it doesn't matter. And I don't think that astronomers care about counting the number of stars. I mean, they might have at some sort of section of NASA, they might put the sort of new nerds who go to work for NASA in a sort of room where they have to count all the stars they can see. But when it comes to the more respected astronomers, I think they care more about finding out information about the stars that is not quite as shallow. I mean, they might be interested in learning about what defines certain stars and makes them special, rather than just the number of them. We have our own star, and I think that's the one we have to care about, because that's the most important one. I mean, in the universe on the whole, our star doesn't really matter much. Our star could go away and it wouldn't really impact the universe. But it would impact us, because we rely on this, our sun, to make life. And it's quite a beautiful thing. And our sun, does a lot for us. But it's one of those things that people used to be sun worshippers. They used to worship the sun like a god, and nowadays we don't do that anymore. And I think that comes from having realized that if you stop sacrificing goats, it's still, the sun still comes up every morning. So we have learned that we don't need to sacrifice goats to make sure that the sun rises every morning. I think that came from someone forgetting to sacrifice a goat once and realized that the sun didn't really care. So we don't need to bother about that. We don't need to worry about that. But I still think it would be good if more people started thinking about the sun and actually looked at the sun, because we have proof that it exists. We have proof that it is there. And I think it's much better to sort of worship the sun than worship, God or anything like that. We know that the sun is there. And I also think that way about people who, tree huggers and people who pray to trees, sort of have a big oak somewhere that they sort of treat as their god. That's good, because that oak exists. We have proof that that oak exists and is there. And it's a little bit more iffy whether or not that oak might be sentient or might have some sort of supernatural powers. I mean, that's kind of difficult to prove, actually. But at least we know it's there. And that's the problem with many people who argue about God, is that we don't know if God exists or not. And it's sort of like it's a bit difficult to talk about God for that reason, because you can't really have discussions about God, because the believers in God will always say that, well, God is beyond human comprehension. But that renders all discussions about God useless, because if he is beyond human comprehension, then just shut up and let God get on with his own business, because he's clearly too important for humans. Yes, so that's how many stars there are in the sky. The second question comes here. Why don't you give us all a crash course in Swedish history? Yeah, sure. It started a few thousands of years ago, when people who lived in northern Central Europe said that the weather here is too nice, is too pleasant, is too average. What we're going to do is that we're going to take boats up north to that sort of odd island we see to the north, where there is very dark, it's cold, and there's lots of wild animals, and half of the year it's completely dead. And we're going to go there and settle down, because that seemed like a good idea to these people. They were clearly banished from Central Europe. So they went to Scandinavia, which they thought at the time was an island. They were so stupid back then. They didn't know that Scandinavia was connected through Finland to Russia. They just thought it was an island. So they went to Scandinavia and then they settled down. Of course, they had a very rough time. I mean, one of the reasons why Scandinavia is a very nice place to live in nowadays, but that's because we have electric heating and electric light. We can turn on a lamp on, and we can turn on the sort of a radiator, and we can have a nice time. I mean, Sweden is nowadays very easy to live in, because those two things solved all of our problems. But in the past, people would spend the winters freezing to death in complete darkness. And that kept on happening for a while, until they finally said, we have had enough of this. And they decided to take boats and go around the world, taking slaves and selling slaves, conquering new lands, pillaging, raping, trading, and doing all sorts of stuff. And these people were called the Vikings, which you may have heard of. The Vikings were actually somewhat sophisticated. We tend to think of the Vikings as almost entirely barbaric, but that's because they weren't Christian. And at the time, that was kind of frightening. It was frightening to see these pagans, these heathens, these barbarians going around having better technology, being better at fighting, and just generally being awesome at things. It was very difficult for Christians to accept this. But the Vikings didn't really mind Christianity. They took the opportunity because they weren't Christian. They could attack, monasteries and so on. But they later became Christian, of course. I mean, and they started bragging about being Christian because it's sort of like gaining a EU membership today. It was something that was prized and something that meant that you could evolve yourself in European business. But I mean, it sounds nerdy to talk about history in those terms, but it is true that history repeats itself. And the way that the Christian Catholic Church came about was the political thing. It's like the EU today. And now we're seeing that people want to get out of the EU. Because the EU messed things up. I mean, the euro is fucking horrible. There is very few European countries that wants the euro. So people are starting to sort of break out. And that also happened in Christian Europe. Because people, as we all know, became Protestant. Haha. People started going with all these different odd new people, progressive people who wanted to change religion. And in Scandinavia, we went with a guy called Martin Luther, who had strange ideas of what Christianity should mean. And nowadays, when we look at Protestantism, we look at Lutherans, it doesn't seem that progressive. It seems quite cold and reserved. It seemed quite horrible. But at the time, it was quite amazing. And Scandinavia was very quick on joining that bandwagon, partly so that the king could take money away from the churches. But a few things started happening then on. I mean, Sweden got involved in the 30 Years' War, which was a war between Protestants and Catholics. And after that, Sweden got an empire as a result of that war. And Sweden started taking over all these places in Northern Europe. Sweden became the big force in Northern Europe. Then Russia came and took that title. And for that period onwards, Swedes have been very bitter about Russia. We don't really like Russia. I mean, if there's any Russians watching this, hello, I don't mind you personally, but your country ruined our country. And it also made us feel very... We used to feel quite confident. We used to feel as if Sweden was a big sort of empire of the north, like a lion in the north. We used to call, I think we've called several kings of Sweden the Lion of the North. That's sort of a title that is used quite often. But then, Russia came along and said that we are actually a small country and that we should stay in our place. And they took Finland from us, which was horrible, because Finland is supposed to be Swedish. Now Finland wants to be independent, and it's all just silly. But anyway, we then entered a union with quotation marks with Norway, which we call it a union. We call it a union between Sweden and Norway, but it doesn't change the fact that Norwegians weren't quite as willing to go into the union as Sweden. So I can't really... Norway was Swedish at that time. And then they got independence, and they started celebrating it. And we have been alone since then. And I mean, Denmark still keeps Greenland and the Faroese Islands. And we have nothing. We don't have Finland, we don't have Norway, we don't have Estonia. And it's quite miserable. I mean, the 1900s and forwards have been hellish for Sweden in terms of military. We've been quite passive. Actually, I shouldn't say it's not been hellish, it's been the opposite. It's been wonderful. Because that's the thing we shouldn't forget, is the fact that neutrality and not taking sides in military conflicts actually is quite a good thing, because it means that less people die, and we shouldn't we should but that's the problem that all people who study history goes into, is that when you study history, you start realizing that you don't see these historic wars and historic battles really as conflicts. You see them as more romantic than that. They are sort of like they seem to be more dignified than the sort of conflicts that goes on today. And yes, that's a bit of an observation about war. Anyway, that's sort of basically Swedish history. It's quite exciting. There's more to say than that, but I'm going to answer the last question now. This is a question that I got now a long time ago, so it might not be relevant anymore. In fact, the person might be dead. So, but I'm not sure if anyone actually sends me a question hoping for productive, practical answers. It's sort of irrelevant always. But so the person says, a spider just dropped down from the ceiling and perched itself atop of my head. It was written in all caps, so I presume that person was in a state of panic, and that's why the question is sent to me. I must apologize if it was a poisonous or venomous. I don't quite know the difference. Well, I do know the difference, but I don't know which is which, because it's something venomous when it injects poison in you, and something is poisonous when it is poisonous to eat it. So, if it was a venomous spider, then you might be dead. And I apologize for that, because I should have been more active. I should at least have answered the question when you were still alive, because it feels wrong for me. Because I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in afterlife. I believe that once we're dead, our consciousness is gone, like this. It doesn't return to Earth in any way. And I think you've lost your opportunity to have a question answered by me. But I am going to answer it just for the sort of ceremonial purposes. I will answer the question. So, what to do when you have a spider on top of your head? I think the important bit is not to panic. It's not to sort of write messages in all caps, because the spider will notice that panic. And the spiders don't like all caps. Spiders are very tedious about nice formatting. I'm silly. But what you should do is just carefully take a hand and lift the spider with one of its legs and slightly pull it away and put it away from you. And then the spider will happily go away. Because spiders don't actually want to eat humans. Spiders are not big enough. There are big spiders, but they mostly exist in fantasy films and literature and games. In real life, the biggest spider is still quite small. It's smaller than a human, at least. And I think we should be happy about that. I think we should be happy every day you wake up and realize that yes, spiders are smaller than humans. That's a reason to celebrate. Because if when spiders, I say when, because this is likely going to happens at some point in the foreseeable future, spiders will develop to be larger than humans, and when that happens, we will have available technology to kill them with. We will have new guns designed to kill spiders, but as of yet, we are completely unprepared for giant spider attacks. So I'm quite happy about that. But you know, in Sweden in general, we don't really have that many spiders. We don't have poisonous, venomous spiders in Sweden. We don't really have any venomous animals. We have moose or elk, depending on your geographical location. We say elk here in Sweden. Americans would say moose, and British people tend to say moose because you have been Americanized by American cultural colonialism. It is elk. The Latin name for a moose is Alces alces. The Americans got it wrong. They called the wrong animal an elk, and now we're in this sort of messy situation right now. So But we have elks in Sweden, but they can be dangerous. I mean, the elks kill a lot of people, mostly in traffic, because elks are stupid. They don't understand. They don't have mind. They don't have minds sophisticated enough to understand human traffic and human cars. So they just go ahead in the road and yet run over and kill a family of 4 driving on their way to a ski resort up in the Scandinavian mountains. Actually, this is interesting. I believe the Scandinavian mountains are called the Scandies. Scandies, spelled with an E. It's not an I, but an E. Scandies. I figured that was interesting. So this family is on their way to a nice little ski trip, and suddenly a moose steps in front of the car and kills everyone, including itself. This is suicidal elk. Yes, and we have snakes, but I don't think they are that poisonous, venomous. I'm completely falling apart now, so I might as well say goodbye. And it's been a longer episode than usual, and I'm gonna try and get back next week. I'm going to do it properly, I promise you. But in return, I would like people to comment and like and do all those sort of things that I never ask for because I'm too embarrassed to ask for it. But considering that I'm now falling apart, I might as well ask for that. Goodbye. I'm waving in front of the microphone, but I don't think you can see that. You can't see my jacket, so you can't see me waving. But I'm doing it very carefully. It's sort of like I'm almost fondling the microphone with my hand.